Χαιρόμαστε που έχουμε εδώ πέρα τον Mike Feinstein. Είναι φίλος πράσινος από τις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες. Είχαμε γνωριστεί πολλά χρόνια πριν και με άλλους φίλους όπως και ο Μιχάλης ο Τρεμόπουλος και είχαμε κάνει κουβέντες για τους πράσινους στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες. Έχει διατελέσει μέλος του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου στην πόλη της Σάντα Μόνικα και δήμαρχος για 2 χρόνια, 2000 μέχρι 2002. Είναι από τα ιδρυτικά μέλη των Πράσινων στην Καλιφόρνια και των Πράσινων των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Άρα θα μιλήσουμε about the Green New Deal, about climate movements, about the era of Trump, the citizen movements, the citizens movements. Θα μιλήσουμε λοιπόν για θέματα τα οποία μας αφορούν και εμάς. Είμαστε μπροστά στις εκλογές, αλλά δεν γίνεται καμία συζήτηση, δηλαδή κάνα πράσινο New Deal. Στην Αμερική όμως ήταν οι πράσινοι που έθεσαν πρώτοι το θέμα του, αυτό που ονομάζουμε Πράσινη Κοινωνική Συμφωνία. Στην πορεία πρόσφατα κάποιοι δημοκρατικοί γερουσιαστές άνοιξαν τη συζήτηση, οπότε μιλάμε και για το τι σημαίνει το Πράσινη Κοινωνική Συμφωνία. What is about a Green New Deal, if there is Green New Deal, or liberal, or progressive, or things like this. Είναι μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα συζήτηση, νομίζω μας αφορά άμεσα και σαν χώρα και σαν Ευρώπη, γιατί είναι και ιδέες που έχουν αναπτυχθεί στην Ευρώπη. Υπάρχει μια αλληλεπίδραση μεταξύ των ιδεών της Ευρώπης και των ιδεών στην Αμερική. I speak about the influence of green ideas in both in Europe and in the USA. It's all the time is in influence. Okay. Ωραία. Μετά θα μας δοθεί ευκαιρία να μιλήσουμε και για τα θέματα των πόλεων. We will speak about the cities, about the transformation, about new ideas about the cities, about all this. Okay, thanks that you are here. Να πω ότι είναι χαρά μας γιατί μέσα στο πρόγραμμά του έβαλε και τη σημερινή συνάντηση και από την άλλη μεριά και εμείς είναι μια δύσκολη εποχή για συζητήσεις τέτοιου είδους. Παρ' όλα αυτά βρισκόμαστε αρκετοί άνθρωποι που εγώ δεν το περίμενα, να πω την αλήθεια, γιατί πολλοί λείπουν διακοπές, είναι σε άλλα μέρη. Ο Μάικ θα συνεχίσει μετά σε άλλα μέρη. Να πω ότι είναι και ελληνικής καταγωγής και that you are Greek, half Greek. Ωραία, οπότε θα μας εξηγήσει και ίσως και τα δικά του προσωπικά. The floor is yours.
Okay, stop. So, Kalispera, good evening, and Feristo, thank you for coming out. I don't know what he just said about what I'm supposed to say, but I will try and do a good job. I'll talk a little bit, but I want to be able to be here and answer your questions, so please think about what questions you want to ask, and I'll leave a lot of time for questions. And normally what I like to do is take 4 or 5 questions at the same time so that we can have a synergy between the answers. And first, I'll just start out with my connection here to Greece. I was born in Patras in 1958, and I was adopted by Americans in February of 1959 and brought back to the United States and raised there. Great life. I ended up having all sorts of advantages. I got into politics. I helped to start the Green Party in California. I helped to start the Green Party nationally. I was 8 years on the Santa Monica City Council, 2 years as mayor, and I never knew anything about my past here in Greece, other than that I was adopted. Just on this trip, on Wednesday, I got results from a DNA test, which suggested I had 2 very strong relatives, both who were Greek. On Thursday, my friend Yanis here helped direct me to the National Archives of Greece. I have my passport from when I was a baby here in Greece, when I left the country, and on that passport is a number that all these years later, we were able to go to the archives and they found my records from 60 years ago and confirmed who my birth family is. And on this trip now, I'm meeting the surviving relatives and hearing my story about Greece. but my parents in the United States always told me that I was from Greece, ever from when I was a very small child, and I was always very proud of being here from Greece, and now, of course, I'm happy to be here tonight. So, as a green context for us getting together tonight, Northern Europe is burning. The temperatures now are frightening, and this is only the beginning. We are already on the cusp of runaway climate change in a way that not only threatens our survival as a species, but millions of other species. And we've already wiped out millions of other species even before today. So we're in a moment of crisis, and it's important to think about what kind of green ideas and green solutions are possible, and how can we achieve them. And I want to share a bit about my experience both as a green legislator and mayor in California, and what the Green Party in the United States is proposing with its own Green New Deal, as well as how did Trump happen? Because that's always an interesting thing as well. On the Green New Deal, and why it's so important that there is a Green Party, a strong Green Party in our political systems, is that the establishment larger parties are usually deeply connected to the multinational corporation, global capitalist economy, and when they talk about making changes to deal with the environment, there are certain compromises that they accept. They aren't willing to challenge the power structure. Greens are more willing to talk about the ecological realities in plain language and are more of a threat to that corporate structure than the other parties. But to the degree that we have candidates and we have a viable party and we can publicize these stronger positions, we do create some political space for the more mainstream parties to move ahead. So there's a very important synergistic relationship between having a Green Party to say what's really going on and the possibility for at least some change from the larger parties. And also, we look at all these students now with the global climate strikes. There has to be a political party that will give direct representation to those social movements, to those ecological movements. And that's what the Green Party has done all over the planet. We are in approximately 100 countries, not just in Europe, not just in North America, but in South America, in Africa, in Asia Pacific. What that teaches us is that there is a global response as a species among humans to our unsustainability and lack of justice as a species. And that's something that goes beyond individual cultures. Each Green Party is appropriate for its country, and yet there's a broader sort of perspective. And in the United States, for the first time, we've been hearing a Green New Deal from the Democrats. But it has been the Green Party that has been campaigning on the idea of a Green New Deal for many other years. Our candidate for governor in the last two elections campaigned on a Green New Deal. Our presidential candidate the last time campaigned on a Green New Deal. And what the Democrats have seen is that young people are voting for the Green Party in much larger numbers. People who are 60, 70 years old, who have a habit of voting for one of the larger traditional parties, they're not as likely to vote Green. But what the Democrats are seeing is that with younger people voting Green, they will lose power unless they begin to start adopting these issues. So that's an important piece. Then on the policy level, again, the Democrats, and even with Ocasio-Cortez from New York, they are more likely to want to depend on market systems and the free market economy to produce solutions. And there's probably some degree in which, had we started with a global carbon tax in the 1980s, that markets could have played a stronger role. and there's still a reason to use carbon taxes. But at this time, it's far too late to think that simply a capitalist market system with some level of environment is going to be sufficient, because the scientists are telling us we have 10, 11 years before runaway climate change, which we can't deal with. So one of the ways in which the Green Party is stronger on a Green New Deal than the Democrats and trying to create more space is, for example, with war spending, military spending. The Democrats and Republicans in the United States mostly have a consensus that they leave the military budget alone. Maybe the Republicans want to increase it more than the Democrats. The Green Party wants to cut it by 50% to start. And we believe that to reduce international conflicts, we need to promote local economic self-reliance in other countries, having people be able to care for themselves instead of having reasons to be fighting their neighbors. That's the way to start. And then second, to have a sustainable, full cycle use of resources of the earth instead of the first world stealing from the third world and using resources in a wasteful, unsustainable manner, which has brought us climate change. So first, we start with that. And none of the Democratic candidates, the more than 20 who are now in the presidential debates, have been willing to really touch this issue of cutting down the war spending. Second, in terms of the energy industry, we believe in public ownership of the energy industry. And not necessarily on national levels, but community-based municipal power. That communities would actually own their ability to harvest the energy of the earth, to be having distributed generation of electricity, where each home, each building becomes its own solar production. The decentralization of power is a core approach that we have in the Green Party. The larger parties aren't touching that sort of thing. Also, the fact is that the oil companies, the fossil fuel companies, have known since at least the 1970s, the documents have come out that they knew that their policies would lead to climate change. The idea that we're going to trust them today to get us out of this is absolutely insane. So one, we cut the corporate subsidies. The corporate subsidies to the fossil fuel industries are billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that has to stop first. And it's both the direct subsidies and it's the U.S. military presence around the planet, which is there to dominate other countries to ensure the resources come back to the United States. So we would cut all of that and then instead go and modify the World Trade Organization, all the other trade agreements we have to try and promote local economic self-reliance and ecological self-reliance in other countries. And of course, as Greeks, you know that the root between ecology and economy is eco, for home. So, of course, the two should be able to go hand in hand. And we're trying to produce that sort of example. So, all those different ways are ways that hopefully we're going to create more space than where the Democrats are, and maybe give them a little bit more space. And at the same time, the social movements like the Sunrise Movement in the United States, which has been the strongest one now to promote young people getting involved with climate change, we need to have them see when they're frustrated and wanting to pull their hair out listening to the Democrats that there are political alternatives. Now, that leads to how do we have more strength for those political alternatives? The Green Party in the United States is advocating for changing to a system of proportional representation. Fortunately, most you and other European countries don't use the British system. We're stuck underneath the British system, where you elect one seat at a time, one party loses, or one party wins and the rest of the party loses. So as people say, why aren't we getting these green ideas faster? We're using that to try and talk about why we need to change our very outdated system. Now, that's connected to how we got this Nazi, fascist, racist, sexist, homophobe, and idiot in the White House. Our electoral system, because it just produces two large parties, it means that, well, the way for me to win is to destroy you, and the way for you to win is to destroy me, and the voters have nowhere else to go. And the Democrats consistently use the propaganda that if you vote green, you're spoiling the system, and the Green Party is spoiling the system. So, especially with the higher up that you go, you end up with only two choices. And we have this saying in English that if you continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, you end up with the evil of two lessers. And what's happened is that every election we hear, you have to hold your nose, you have to vote for the Democrats, because no matter how mediocre the Democrats are, the Republicans are worse. And what happens is every time you do that, election after election, the Democrats keep getting worse. The entire political spectrum moves further and further to the right, so that now, after so many years, somebody like Trump becomes possible. So we look at it, it is true that there is great racism, white nationalism, white supremacy in the United States, and Trump appealed to a lot of those people, but he was only possible because the Democrats failed to provide a progressive alternative for so many years, and they would fight against the electoral reforms which would make the Green Party possible. The two least popular candidates for president since they've done polling in the United States were Trump and Clinton. And neither of them got even half of the vote. Clinton got 48% of the vote, and Trump got 46% of the vote. How did Trump get into office then? When the United States was formed, as many of you know, we were a slave-holding nation. For we enslaved human beings, the southern half of the country, the South. And slaves were counted in the elections. They couldn't vote, but they were counted as 3/5 of a human being. So when you were looking at the Congress and how many seats should one state have compared to the next, because there would be a lot of slaves living in a state, those were counted at 3/5 of humanity to make sure that the southern states got more seats, even though they couldn't vote. Now, for president, what that meant is the southern states said if we were going to have a union, we could not just have a popular vote by the population for the whole country for president. Instead, we would take this formula where each state gets a certain number of seats in Congress, and then we'd use that for president as well. So each state casts a certain number of votes, and if you win a state, then you win all of those votes, and it's called the Electoral College. So the Electoral College is a direct result of slavery, and it's not surprising. In fact, it's a tragedy that after having the first black president, we now have this horrid racist in office, and it was the Electoral College that allowed him to win. Even though he lost the popular vote, he won many small states very close, and then lost big amounts of population in other states. So he was able to become the president, putting aside issues about Russian interference, and there are people who feel different ways about that, but even putting that aside, he was able to become president because we have this system that has its roots in historic racism and slavery, and then has become in the presidency. And there are many of us who believe that this feels like 1935 Germany today, because the Republicans in the Congress, even when Trump breaks the law, don't do anything, because Trump is willing to appoint judges who will change all the laws to deregulate big industry and do a lot of other crazy things, undoing all the protections that we have for our society. So we no longer have the checks and balances that the founders of the party imagined, where the legislative branch would check the president, and now the legislative branch is approving all of these very right-wing, corporate-based, and socially very scary judges as well, and these people have lifetime appointments. So we're at a point now where if we don't get him out soon, we're going to lose the courts. And that means we're not going to have the ability to go to the law and have a check and balance. So it's absolutely frightening. And this is where you go back again to the question about, are the Democrats enough? Are they going to still cause the problems, or are they going to fix the problems? One of the reasons that Clinton lost in 2016 is that the Democratic Party turnout was lower than it had been for previous years. The Republicans didn't get more votes. The Democrats got many fewer votes. What the Green Party argues to use for president is, number one, a popular vote and get rid of the Electoral College, but second, the Irish system and the Australian system to elect a single seat. What is that system? Imagine that you have 3 people running for president or governor or mayor, and you agree with 2 of them, and the third one you hate. Among the 2 that you like, there's one candidate that you agree with the most, but they don't have a very good chance of winning. The second one is, they're mediocre, but they're better than the evil one. Which one do you vote for? The one you like the most, or the one that you hold your nose on? It's a hard decision, and what happens for president is, when people don't like the Democrats, and the Green Party is so small, they don't come out and vote at all. So because the Democrats are mediocre, their turnout went down. Now in the last election, Clinton beat Sanders in the Democratic Party primary election. Under the system that I'm talking about, which is called ranked choice voting, somebody like Bernie Sanders could have run in the general election with the Green Party. And he would have been on the ballot, and Clinton would have been on the ballot. Now what happens is, you rank Sanders number 1, you rank Clinton number 2. Because more people turn out to vote. Now, Clinton lost in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, places where the trade agreements that favor international capital instead of workers and the environment, where those people lost their good union jobs. Trump appealed to those people. He wasn't honest, but he appealed to those people. And Hillary Clinton didn't have a good answer, and her husband, Bill Clinton, had supported the North American Free Trade Agreement, which destroyed many industries in the United States. So in the scenario I'm talking about with the reform that the Green Party is talking about, somebody like Bernie Sanders, who did oppose those trade agreements, who spoke to those issues, could have been on the ballot in November. More people would have turned out, and the election would have been entirely different. One of the other things to know about our presidential debates is this. There's an organization called the League of Women Voters. It is a non-partisan organization that sponsors debates all over the country, and they're fair. Normally they include everybody who's on the ballot. In the 1980s, the Democrats and Republicans didn't like the idea that in 1980 there was somebody other than a Democrat and Republican included by the League of Women Voters. This was a gentleman named John Anderson. He had been a Congress member in Illinois, and he got 6% for president in 1980. So by 1988, the Democrats and Republicans say, we won't be in your debates unless we can decide who is in the debates and who can't. The League of Women Voters, because they had integrity, stopped. They said, well, we're not going to listen. You can't tell us what to do. So the Democrats and Republicans created a corporation called the Commission on Presidential Debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates decides who's in the presidential debates. Their board of directors are 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. And they get a tax break under U.S. law where large corporations give them money to put on these debates, and they get a tax break. The corporations get a tax break, which means the rest of us have to pay the taxes to compensate for the money that they don't have to pay because they're getting a tax break there. So the Green Party platform opposes that tax break, and we would get rid of that. But one of the reasons you don't see Greens and you don't see a serious talk about climate change in the presidential debates is because the Democrats and Republicans by law control it, and the large corporations own the media companies, and they have a vested interest in keeping us out as well. So it makes it a very scary system in our country. Now that it has gotten so bad with Trump, hopefully the Democrats won't screw up and they'll get somebody good enough to get rid of Trump. But maybe you've heard the Democratic National Committee has already voted that they will not have a debate about climate change, because some of the candidates have said, let's have a specific debate about climate change rather than one question in one evening. Now imagine if you had a climate change debate in the general election where you had a Green along with a Democrat and a Republican, and we could put out these ideas in their strongest form. So it's a difficult challenge in our country. Now, what is our strategy as a Green Party? I'll touch on that and then think about what kind of questions you want to ask. Because the electoral system is so unfair on the state and federal level, we try and focus more on the municipal level. Because there, we can get elected, we can show that we're capable of governing, and then we can make the argument for these larger electoral reforms of proportional representation, ranked choice voting, and public financing of elections. We can make those arguments and say, look, you have this great Green city council member in your city. Why isn't that person in the state legislature? It's because we need to have the electoral reform. In my case, I ran on the local level in Santa Monica. I was elected in 1996. 13 candidates for 4 seats. I finished second of 13 candidates for the 4 seats. And on election day, I finished first. But before election day, there were people who voted by mail. And when people vote by mail, they vote early before they know as much about all the candidates. I went door to door. I was very grassroots. And one of the interesting things when you think about what do people want in politics, in 1994 in the United States, that was the year that Newt Gingrich and the Republicans took over the Congress, and it was a shift to the right wing. In Santa Monica, it was a year of being against homeless people. During the 1980s, Ronald Reagan had helped to push to defund mental health care in the United States. And as a result, people who should have been getting mental health care were pushed on the streets. They became homeless. And it was a national emergency, and Santa Monica, where I live, had very large number of homeless people in the parks, on the sidewalks. They had nowhere to go, and there was no money or health care for them. So in 1994, there was a vicious campaign against the homeless, and that year, one additional seat changed hands on my city council to somebody who was anti-homeless. So when I ran in 1996, there were people who said to me, just don't talk about the homeless issue. You can be a Green, talk about more parks and open space, talk about the environment, solar power, everybody will be happy. But I had to be honest, and I said to myself, I want to go into politics clean and with a conscience, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, fine. But I didn't want to corrupt my values just to try and get into politics. And I wanted to see if being progressive and honest worked. So the fact when I ran with 13 candidates for 4 seats and I finished second, there were 3 incumbents. That means somebody who was already in office the last time and somebody who had served a few years previous like that. And I beat them all on election day when I was going door to door. So what that tells people is that a lot of people who are voters, even if they don't agree with you on all the issues, because I was the most left-leaning person we had elected to our council, as left-leaning as anybody had ever been. But even the conservative people felt that they could trust me, because at least they knew what I was saying was what I believed, and they were so happy just to have that in politics